Hey, we have a lot to cover today on TWIRx. This is This Week in Pharmacy. And today is the 4th today? Oh my goodness. April 4th, 2025. We start off with some very disturbing news right out of the gate. And
the breaking news just coming in, a harrowing scene. Authorities say a gunman opening fire, a deadly pharmacy shooting. Authorities say he was angry with pharmacies. And it all comes as the suspect in the murder of the United Healthcare CEO is also in the news tonight. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi now seeking the death penalty against Luigi Mangione. ABC's chief investigative correspondent Aaron Katersky tonight with the images from this deadly pharmacy shooting just coming in.
Tonight, police in California are investigating a deadly shooting targeting a major pharmacy chain after this man allegedly shot a Walgreens employee. The suspect, Narciso Gallardo Fernandez, is seen, police say, shooting at this surveillance camera inside the store, where he allegedly shot and killed employee Eric Velasquez and opened fire on other workers as they fled outside.
That news came from ABC News just this week. I'm sure you've heard about it. This is disturbing. Our hearts go out to the staff, the family of the Walgreens employee that was killed. This is absolutely horrific. We do have additional news. We hope you've had a good week. And we're about to start This Week in Pharmacy. Hello, my pharmacy family out there. Welcome to This Week in Pharmacy. I am your host and founder of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, Todd Uri. Today is April 4th, 2025. As we just started into TWIRx, we were talking about this horrific shooting in California, and employee Eric Velasquez was killed. This is just horrible to think about. I think about you out there. I think about the techs. I think about our pharmacists out there who put up with the public and the frustration of you as employees. You should feel safe at work. And I'm wondering what you're feeling like today and this week. And it's it's coming off a high. It's coming off of the APHA 2025. We had an amazing encounter with over 30 different organizations and people that participated in our post show that'll be coming up later next week. But once again, just a time to reflect on how important your roles are to the public, and how many of you out there who are, what are you feeling today, and how are you feeling today? So that's a lot to think about. And I just want to say that we want to be supportive at Pharmacy Podcast Network. We have over 40 shows that dial into different subjects. If there is a subject that we're not covering, if you'd like to talk more about the way that you're treated as a caregiver, as a provider, as someone who deals with the crazy public, please reach out to us. We would love to feature you. We'd love to feature your story. I think it's important to share with each other what you're going through. So there was additional news this week out of the Arkansas Advocate, and it says proposed ban on drug middlemen owning retail pharmacies passes the Arkansas House Committee. Opponents claim HB 1150 will reduce patients' access to specialty drugs. We know that the PBM reform keeps pushing throughout the nation. I believe, and many of you listening believe, that insurance companies should never own pharmacies because it's a conflict of interest. Take a look at this. Look it up. Just go to the arkansasadvocate.com. Once again, that's arkansasadvocate.com, and read this. This is amazing information. It's amazing time in the state of Arkansas that has been leading in PBM reform in many ways over the years. Our next bit of news comes from the Moby News, Moby Health News, and you can find it at mobyhealthnews.com. And it says, Noom, Lilly Direct Pharmacy Provider Partner to increase access to Zepbound. Noom is going to be teaming up with Lilly Direct Pharmacy Provider Gift Health to offer access to single-dose vials of Zepbound. I just had a meeting with Gift Health this week. A shout out to the team there. We may be doing some projects with them in the future, but this goes into the integration with Lilly Direct Pharmacy Provider expanding through Noom, approaching to the weight management issues that the nation goes through, and allowing an option for members whose doctors prescribe FDA-approved medications. And the new product integration will be available to members in mid-April. And, I wonder what you think about this as a pharmacist and what you see coming in prescriptions, as well as from the patients that you serve. And I'm wondering if it's always in the best interest of long-term health in teaching our society to, rather than concentrate on your diet and exercise, to just pop a pill or get a shot. And I know there are some people that desperately need the GLP-1 and Zepbound and the medications that concentrate on lessening the stresses on our body for obesity. And then there's a bunch of people that just don't want to do the work. And I think there's a big difference between the two. And I'm sure you agree that long sustaining health, to live healthy lives, has to come from what we're eating, how often we're eating, and how often we're exercising, instead of, once again, just the quick fix. But I know that there are people out there that desperately need to be they're captive in their weight and their obesity, and these medications are life-saving, and I think they're wonderful. I just think there is a definite balance. Someone that we talk to a lot on the Pharmacy Podcast Network's been a member of the network for quite some time, has been Robert Kress, and he is known as the functional pharmacy godfather, the godfather of functional pharmacy. He started dabbling in functional medicine over 25 years ago, and then got super serious about it about 20 years ago, and has just been a beacon of functional health and functional medicine for years. And I just want to welcome Robert's segment to This Week in Pharmacy. Let's hear from Robert.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Rob Kress here, functional pharmacist, godfather of functional pharmacy, coming to you with a little addition for This Week in Pharmacy. And I want to talk about a topic that is an ever-growing topic, and you're going to be seeing a lot more of it because the industry's changed over the years. So in the realms of hormone replacement therapy, let's talk about dudes, and let's talk about testosterone. It's a very interesting topic because right now, what the landscape looks like, I used to own my own compound in pharmacy back in the early 2000s. And even now, by far, bioidentical hormones, they go to the women, right? Just because they're the ones that are raising their hand and saying something's wrong, getting adequately, properly tested and replenished, right? With dudes, I think the problem oftentimes is that they're not going to raise their hand and say something's wrong. Now, I do want to talk about testosterone and the benefits and how to look at this, because like anything, you're going to have some people way far this way and then other people way far this way. But we really want to understand what's good for the patient and the individual and what the options are. So let's look at the landscape. We've got these testosterone clinics that are literally franchises popping up, and they're doing really, really well. It allows the guy to go in, get his labs drawn, some of them instantaneous, like within 20 minutes. And then they walk on out with their vial of testosterone or pre-filled syringes. You've got online companies that are also offering the same thing. You do a virtual consult with a physician, they approve it, shipped to your door. And this has lowered the barrier for treatment, especially in cases which it's dearly needed, which is really important because, let's just chat about testosterone for a bit because, we call it the male hormone, but also I think it's important to understand that it's applicable to both men and women. Now, I also have my Man Unmedicated platform, which is basically men's health, building power, potential, performance, and purpose. We go over my 7 peaks. Now, so you can imagine that this is a big topic within it because they come into our coaching practice and we will look at such levels. So this is a really interesting thing because when you monitor testosterone, any hormone, it's really critical, really important to also monitor things like adrenals, right? And you've heard me talk about this, you'll hear me talk about it again. Our hormones rest on a bed of adrenals. And what does that mean? Well, I like to tell people, let's look at it this way. Your body's got a budget. And when you're younger, the budget's higher, right? Say you got $100 a day to make hormones. So early on, it's like, man, I could put my money on my testosterone, I could put on my DHEA, I could put on my cortisol. In my 20s, I am riding high on all this stuff. As we age, as we endure chronic stress, because that's usually the biggest thing, the budget depletes. So suddenly maybe it's like, I got $10 to put down on this. So where am I going to put it? Well, I'm going to put on cortisol first and foremost, because cortisol is the fight or flight hormone. And when we're talking about fight or flight, our bodies have been primarily designed. Like this DNA, this nervous system was crafted 160,000 years ago. Now, obviously there's been modifications over time, but 160,000 years ago, we were living a completely different lifestyle. We were out under the beautiful sun 90% of the time. We were out in nature a lot. But I want to talk about the stress response because we are built for short-term acute stressors, meaning the stressors come and go. For instance, if I'm out here hiking and a bear starts chasing me, that's a short-term stressor. So what happens? Well, my cortisol, everything that I have puts the energy into my muscles and into my brain for critical thinking, critical action. So I can either fight or I can flight. Where it doesn't go into my gut, because who cares about digestion? It doesn't go into my sexual faculties, because who cares about procreation at that point? You just want to live. So basically, we've been kind of designed on an acute stressor response. And that literally stressors are life or death. All right? Now, modern day living, the stressors aren't life or death, although we might make them out to be because our body believes them to. We've trained our body. Our body's been trained over the millennia to understand that. Now, stressors are also chronic. They don't tend to go away. That's why we go to places like this to get out, right? To kind of get away from that constant bombardment of obligations, of questions, of phone calls, of texts, of overt media trying to get a hold of us, of our cell phones, right? All that stuff. So what happens is we're not designed for chronic stress, but that's what our body's being asked to lift up for the demands. So now in this point, we're in this phase 2. So my partner and I, we like to break it down to 3 phases. First phase is we've got the big budget, we can put our hormones down, we can kick everything out. Phase 2, the body starts to say, whoa, my budget's getting a little smaller, my savings is running thin, I gotta start to conserve. I'm gonna start to put my money on cortisol. So in this case, I'm not gonna put on the DHEA. For women, I'm not gonna put on the progesterone, I'm not gonna put on the estrogen. For men, I'm not gonna put on the testosterone. Interesting thing I've seen. Testosterone is very much a fight or flight hormone for women, meaning they have a stronger potential or greater ability, it seems, to create it out of their adrenal glands. So oftentimes in the stage 2, we'll start to see men's hormones, like testosterone, starting to climb. But for a female, it might still be up there until we get to stage 3. Now understand, most people can live in this stage 2 for their whole adult life. But that stage 2 is where we lose vitality. It's that stage 2 where we start to lose the benefits of hormones for preventative care and action. For instance, these hormones support our brain, they support our heart, they support our bones, they support the way we make our way through life. Critical thinking is a big one. And obviously we'll talk about testosterone plays a role in all that. Muscle strength, prevent muscle waste and endurance. So that's where we're at. So it's like, okay, I've got this budget to put it down. I'm putting out cortisol because that's all I can do right now. And from that component of just putting on cortisol, other hormones start to die. So now the man is feeling tired, lack of energy, lack of motivation, maybe losing some muscle mass. And in steps the question. The barriers have been lowered, right? We've talked about it's easier for men to actually get into a clinic or go online to get testosterone, which can absolutely make them feel better. But what are the drawbacks when it's not done properly? So one of the things as far as not being done properly is that we don't watch the metabolism of where these hormones go, right? Because testosterone can easily convert to estrogen. And that's a big deal because we don't want too much of that either. So, hi, how are you? So when we've got the conversion that happens, and it happens through fat tissue. So let's just look at this whole formula. We got a few extra pounds on. We got more aromatase enzymes. We start giving ourselves exogenous testosterone because we went to the doc or we had the levels measured and we saw that it was low. That testosterone is being converted to estrogen. Now, what can further help that? Well, or I should say, further support that conversion. Anything that's going to make us metabolically unhealthy. So inflammatory issues, insulin resistance, diabetes, having that extra weight gain, what we eat, how we move. So all this plays a role in proper balance. I just want you to understand that. So now, it doesn't say we can't give testosterone to someone who's got a few extra pounds. We can give them an aromatase inhibitor. You've seen medications used for this, right? There are natural supplements that can be used for this. Zinc, very good for this. So this is part of the protocol on how we assess the individual. One, if they need it, and how do we manage it and retest it to make sure testosterone isn't going in a bad direction. So that's a drawback. And obviously we want the individual to clear through all the proper prostate checks and stuff like that. But I want to talk about prostate real quick because you start to hear that. Someone's got high BPH, shouldn't do testosterone, yada, yada, yada. I need you to take a holistic picture on this because think about it. What is the prostate? It's smooth muscle. Now, what did we talk about? We talked about stress, right? We talked about chronic stress, and now I want to talk about your nervous system. It's how you respond and how you react to stress. And oftentimes, if we're in an anxious state, an agitated state, we're tense, right? And when you tense up, think about the smooth muscle in your body, right? The fascia layers, right? It gets constricted. Now, that's what happens to the prostate, right? So what is that going to do to pressure? It happens to our vascularization as well. Well, it's going to induce more pressure. So now you can have markers go up, right? So this is why we need to look at this in a complete holistic manner, measuring cortisol levels, measuring other hormones like estrogen, assessing the patient for who they are, monitoring the levels to see what they need, find out what they want, right? Because that comes in the next question. I was on a call the other day with a fellow practitioner, and a gentleman's going through a lot in life. And we do that, you know, folks, I'll tell you, and this is part of my man on medicated training. There's these cosmic times in life when we look to the planets and the stars, like Saturn's return, but one is Chiron's return. And it's a biggie. So we get into this middle age of life, and, you know, I liken it to that second mountain theory, or even the analogy, I think this came from Joseph Campbell, you know, you've been climbing up a ladder your whole life, and you finally get to the top of the ladder, you look around, and you're like, shit, this ladder's been going up the wrong wall the whole time. That's the second mountain theory. The first half of your life, you're kind of pleasing society's desires and wishes, family, friends, your culture, you know. Now it's like a time of purpose and creativity, and what can you do with that? So sometimes there's hard decisions that are made around this time, and this individual I was talking to, the conversation wasn't even about that, but he happened to go to his functional medicine practitioner to find out the testosterone levels were low. And he was kind of hesitant, right? He didn't want to be that guy that's going on it. There was a stigmatism to it. I don't need it. I'm stoic, right? This is my thing. This is my recommendation. I'd invite you to consider it. I want you to assess everything completely, including your adrenals. But right now, that testosterone hormone, we already know it's low. You need it to get through the fight, the flight, and the fire right now, because you got a lot of shit going on in life. And if that can help turn on your brain, right? And that's what I'm talking about, is the brain here, to help you endure this last phase of your sprint of chronic stress, because we're sprinting chronic stress. We're sprinting marathons is what happens, which is not healthy. Then why not do it, right? If it's done the right way. So this week in pharmacy, you know, coming from a functional pharmacist perspective, coming from a man on medicated method that I like to use, coming from someone who's dispensed the conventional hormones from the pharmacy counter, coming from someone who has had the compound in pharmacy and is adjusted and dispensed then, as well as coming from the coach, right? And the practice of how to really help people take their life, their journey to the next peak that's waiting for them. This is my advice. I really think everyone should be looked at in an individual way. I don't think there's any shame, but I also don't recommend just giving testosterone as a cure-all, as a Band-Aid, as a patch, as the only solution, especially, and we're seeing this in men in their 40s now, much younger. So why are we seeing low T in earlier ages? That's a question that has to be asked. And it's society, it's culture, it's chronic stress, it's food, it's diet, it's all the above. So thanks for having me. Hope this helps. Provide you little tidbits of information. You can always find me over at functionalpharmacy.com, and also on my podcast on the Pharmacy Podcast Network, which is Beyond the Labs, Functional Pharmacies Beyond the Labs. Because what I always like to say, and this matters a lot for hormonal therapy. Labs don't lie, but they never tell the whole story. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you, Rob. That was awesome. How much functional pharmacy are you implementing into your practice and in the connections that you have with your patients, slowing things down, talking about longevity, talking about getting past the pill or the tablet or the shot? And there's more money in that, by the way. So if you're listening, if you're a community pharmacy owner, functional pharmacy, goodness gracious, there's so much money in what you could create. Dr. Lisa Fast over at DiversifyRx has programs already built out, and there are functional pharmacist coaches out there. Reach out to Rob Kress. He will actually help you. He'll help your community pharmacy transform into a functional pharmacy environment. But I think that is the future, a big part of the future of our consultant pharmacists that are out there. Hey, I skipped some very, very important news. I want to bring this to your attention. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see this on the screen. This is a statement from the Federal Trade Commission. This was just dropped on April 3rd. And this is the statement from Chairman Andrew Ferguson. And I quote, "When I was Solicitor General of Virginia, I advised the Commonwealth's Attorney General on whether to file an amicus brief in a class action suit against pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs. After I was appointed to the commission, I elected to recuse myself in the agency's proceedings against PBMs out of an abundance of caution, and because my recusal had no impact on the case moving forward. But now, no sitting commissioners are currently participating in the proceedings. After closely consulting with my agency's ethics attorney, I have decided to no longer recuse myself from the matter to ensure that the case can continue. Federal ethics guidelines are a bedrock of our justice system. I would like to thank the FTC's designated agency ethics official for advising me on this matter, which is of utmost importance to the American people." Signed, Andrew N. Ferguson, Chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. This is huge. This is so important. We need our FTC's teeth into the three big PBMs in dismantling their business model because it's all about profit. It has nothing to do with healthcare. It has everything to do with denying service in order to soak up as much of that money in the form of profit as possible. Hey, we are celebrating Autism Awareness Week this week in pharmacy. We're so excited to have an autistic pharmacist who is brilliant as a pharmacist, as a community pharmacist. He works for Walgreens. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Brian Catton to This Week in Pharmacy. Hey, welcome to This Week in Pharmacy. We have a very special guest on a very special week that we're going to tell you about, but I want to introduce to This Week in Pharmacy. It's his first time. It's not going to be his last. Dr. Brian Catton, PharmD, and excited that you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Todd.
We've been connected on LinkedIn for years. I've watched you come from a pharmacy student level, and I watched some of the advocacy that you had through some associations that you've talked with and you've met with, some of your publications, but you have a strong advocacy for autism and influence in building a whole nother perception of what people might think of autism. And
thank you.
Are a successful pharmacist. So this is a celebration kind of today too.
Thank you. Yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Well, tell us about that. Tell us about yourself, and our listeners may not know you, but he's easy to find on LinkedIn. Brian Catton, that's Catton. Look him up on LinkedIn and definitely get connected with him in his network. But Brian,
absolutely.
Talk to us about yourself.
Sure. So, yeah, given that April is Autism Acceptance Month, I might as well go a little bit of my journey. So you may have seen the post. So back in 1989, which seems yonders ago, when I was 3, I was diagnosed with what was then known as Pervasive Developmental Disorder Not Otherwise Specified, which now has been rolled into the DSM-5 criteria for autism spectrum disorder. So back then, that was considered like a 1 in 100,000. It's not saying that we didn't exist. It's just that there wasn't really tools and a good understanding of that. But now the incidence for that, because of better diagnostic criteria, because of better access to tools and resources to compare with the 90s, that here I am, fast forward, with a lot of, most of it has been with some tools that really haven't been as helpful to me. Granted that we now know a lot more compared with where we were 30 years ago. So that's where I am in my autism journey. As far as my pharmacy journey, went to pharmacy school back in the mid 2000s, graduated from Shenandoah University in 2010 with my PharmD, practiced pharmacy for about 4 years, decided to take a hiatus and transition more into the medical communications to medical information industries. And then the pandemic hit. And I figured a few years after that to transition back into pharmacy and having a little bit of a Justin Bieber moment, because I remember saying never say never, because that was me back in 2015. And here I am fast forward into 2023. So I've been back at practicing community pharmacy with Walgreens. As far as doing floater work, been doing staff pharmacist, now pharmacy manager, been doing some MTM work, immunizations. And I think part of it, and I realize this may go into your questions as far as where autism and pharmacy intersect.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried looking online to see if there are any other autistic healthcare professionals. Mm-hmm. And no surprise, there really doesn't seem to be a whole lot out there. But when I started wearing my autism symbol pin, which is the rainbow infinity loop, to kind of celebrate that autism is a spectrum, that it has different shapes, colors, features, sizes, flaws, and everything in between, that there were some parents and some others who've kind of opened up about their journey, and that actually there have been some parents who have stayed with us because they know that I'm autistic, and so they understand that, okay, they know they know one person at least that is aware of what's going on as far as like what it's like to grow up, with the tools, the resources, the therapies, and everything in between.
I think
Apologies. Yes, and apologies in advance, Lola. Sorry, it's the dog.
I love dogs. Hey, I I see community pharmacies, for example, and I think of our pharmacy owners out there who have patients in their community, who have people in their community that have some spectrum level of autism, and being more aware of those patients and dialing into obtaining their attention and making things fun to learn and doing things that are purposefully dialing into maybe a child's experience in a health environment where they see these white coats and they see the seriousness. And then all of a sudden you have a pharmacist who knows that this patient or person or little person or person is an autistic child or something. And then they just
Sure.
teach them a specific way that they've learned or that they've like looked into. But I just think it's like a first step of saying, hey, be aware of these people in your community. And guess what? They are an opportunity to expand your pharmacy business as an expert in dealing with, people with autism. I see it as I'm always marketing everything, but I always see it as
of course,
something like that. What do you think of that?
Sure. I mean, from a business standpoint, that certainly makes sense. That that there's more awareness around neuro inclusion and neuro inclusivity. There's actually a document. Yeah, I think it's a documentary on Hulu called Sensory Overload, because one of the features and flaws and somewhere in between that comes with autism is just the sensory input and sensory processing, that there seems to be disconnect. So, for example, in the pharmacy, as you can probably imagine, it gets very loud.
Yeah.
So, not sure if you know that, but yeah. So you have that on top of the fact that I'm processing like all the different types of sounds and everything like that. That sometimes, not saying that it debilitates me, but in a sense, it compromises my ability to process what's going on and to provide the best level of care possible. Not to say that I'm helpless, but certainly that something like that is certainly to be more attuned. So when it comes to businesses, there's definitely the opportunity to provide a more sensory friendly environment. That I realize that's something that's potentially getting more attention with that. So something like maybe like as far as the light level, like maybe dimming the lights a little bit, or changing the different type of lighting from fluorescent to something that's a little bit more that's not as visually overstimulating. From an auditory standpoint, seeing if there's a way as far as like different methods of communication. So for our nonverbal autistics, that they may have like a pegboard or something like that with different pictures that they could point to, or that they may have a communication device where they could just press something like on a tablet device that basically says the word out loud. It's not a substitute. It's certainly not a substitute for it, but it certainly helps as far as the communication aspect to address that nonverbal barrier.
That's amazing, amazing and insightful input. I like the lighting thing. I personally will my entire work environment here at the studio is all low light. And when I walk into fluorescence or I walk into really bright lit places, I will put sunglasses on and people think I'm trying to be indoors. I'm not. It literally bothers my eyes. It gives me headaches, and I cannot pay attention. Meaning, like if I'm at if I'm at a football game, not a football, basketball game in the side of the stadium, and there's all those lights, I have to have sunglasses on. So I don't think that's just autism, but I'm glad you're saying that because
No,
there's
certainly.
factors. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So I think of advocacy. I think of a couple different things. Getting you to teach our pharmacy community, our pharmacists, our geriatric focused pharmacists, our pediatric focused pharmacists, because they're now dialing in, and then teaching our community pharmacy owners and then students just to be aware of autism as a part of the ecosystem of all things healthcare. And another aspect is, how do you think our state representatives, our senators, our federal legislators, how do you think they can be more attuned to what the needs are at more of a mass macro scale of public health?
Sure. I think, as much as I hate to answer a question with a question, the one question that I will seek to address this month is, as far as the autism experience, who's really driving the narrative? Who's really getting platformed? If it's somebody who's not autistic and providing their perspective on things, then frankly, they need to step aside and let us who've actually lived through it be able to speak. Now, granted, again, if you've met only one autistic person, you've only met one autistic person. I can't speak for everybody who's autistic, because my features and flaws and everything in between are different. That's why it's a spectrum. But I think, as far as having legislators, and from a state level, local level, federal level, reach out to us, that we certainly have the ability to share our experiences, to be involved as far as trying to make our communities, our state, our nation better than when we first found it. That it's more than just awareness, which, I mean, I'm certainly grateful for awareness, but it has to translate into acceptance. And part of that aspect of acceptance is being able to shift the narrative to those who have actually lived through it, are living through it, and take the concerns that we have seriously. So, like what you were talking about, like with you wearing sunglasses in the office or at a basketball game, to be able to listen to those. If there are things that are difficult, like as far as accessing healthcare, which is another topic for another time, take those needs serious, take those concerns seriously. There are some states that are doing better than others. There are some states that certainly need some room for improvement. That's a different topic for a different time. But it's more so of just, if there are specific needs that we have, it's important to give us the opportunity to speak from experience and to provide several solutions for that.
Exactly. And the Autism Cares Act is being worked on. If you don't know about it, just for the listeners out there, just Google Autism Cares Act. You'll definitely find some stuff and information on that. What I like about your rounded career, Brian, is you have community touching public health. You're dialing into a specialty, which is the experience of being autistic from a maternal perspective, but you're also serving on our state pharmacy state associations, and you've been involved with the Pennsylvania Pharmacists Association for some time, and it really shows the roundness of who you are as a pharmacist and as a healthcare provider because of how rounded you are.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What's your experience been in dialing into the state pharmacy associations?
It helps me take things from a state level to a practical community level. So, like with the PBM reform bill that got passed on a state level last summer, that I've been able to get in touch with several of the several of the state representatives within my area, because it's just, hey, I'm a constituent in X county, but I'm also practicing at your local pharmacy in such and such a town. These are real constituents that you have, and that when you hear about issues like with spread pricing or with prior authorizations or with patients during that, yes, we understand what the concepts are in theory, but it's now, especially in the context of with pharmacy closures going on and with PBMs dictating to patients where they must go. This is now just, okay, well, you can't go just to one pharmacy to another. Now you have to find some method of transportation to get there. Now, in certain areas, that's easier. For some, it's challenging. Like if you go to like a rural setting where your nearest pharmacy is 20 minutes from your home, and say, oh, oops, actually you have to go to your competitor, which is now another 15-minute drive. Can you even do that? In an urban situation, sometimes it can be even more challenging because patients because it may be difficult for patients to access transportation methods and having to get, it's just a more convoluted process. So trying to break it down on that particular level, so that way it helps constituents understand what's really going on.
Yep, exactly. Brian, this has been special. I want to thank you for being on This Week in Pharmacy. I want you to promise me that you're going to come back and we can continue a conversation.
Certainly.
It's been good. It's been good meeting you. It's been good getting to know you and follow you, and we'll continue to support you. So you were listening to Dr. Brian Catton on This Week in Pharmacy. Once again, reach out to Brian by going to LinkedIn and looking him up, and we'll talk to you. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you, Brian. What a wonderful interview. Thank you so much to everyone who's been supporting Autism Awareness Month and Week, and it will continue throughout the month of April. If you have connections to any associations, if you and your state association have any program information or literature and anything that you're doing, would you please send that to the Pharmacy Podcast just by emailing me? Which is my last name, Eury, EURY, at pharmacypodcast.com. Once again, that's Eury at pharmacypodcast.com. We are excited about our next segment with a rock star in healthcare that focuses on artificial intelligence, what it means for the future of healthcare, and more importantly, what's it mean for pharmacy? We'll be right back.
This episode is sponsored by Independent Pharmacy Cooperative, widely known as IPC. Established in 1983, IPC is the nation's largest group purchasing organization owned by independent pharmacy. With a mission of maximizing the success of community pharmacists, IPC works to provide members with access to effective programs and services designed to enhance profitability for independent pharmacy. Read more about our mission by checking out our website at ipcrx.com. That's ipcrx.com.
Hey, and on This Week in Pharmacy, we have a special guest. I'd like to bring back a friend of mine. I used to call him my digital health godfather, but he has graduated to much bigger things in the realm of artificial intelligence. John Nosta, it's so great to have you here on TWIRx.
It is a pleasure. How far back do we go?
Oh, my goodness. This has been at least 7, 8, maybe 9 years.
It's a long time. We've seen the world change. We've seen the world grow. We've even seen the world condense. You know, back in the days, looking for the big idea in digital health, and who knew that the big idea is actually going to be AI and large language models. So it's an amazing, amazing world, and our discussions are always the best. So it's really, thank you, Todd, for really doing this service and bringing the voice to the clinical community, to the pharmacy community. You know, I've always said that my mom had had 10 doctors, but she only had one pharmacist. And that's a very, very resonant fact even today.
That's a powerful, powerful statement. I believe in it. And what I'm excited about, John is going to be coming back more often to dive into the sectors of pharmacy that we have carved into the audio world through 40 different podcasts. We're talking about pediatrics and geriatrics and marketing and what's the future of drug development. And John, you bring such an interesting and philosophical approach to not only learning, but application. And application sometimes is more important in an age where we're being hit by all kinds of data, and some of that's being driven by artificial intelligence. So that's why I'm glad that you're here to preface this.
Sure. Well, it's funny. I'm wearing my black T-shirt, Todd. So I think I have to have, at least one Steve Jobs note about this. But it's 50 years ago, just about 50 years ago, that Steve went to see this place in California called Xerox PARC, and they showed him this interface. They showed him the way you can talk and interact and play and work with computers. Remember, until then, it was COBOL, it was Fortran, it was a card compiler. It was difficult, right? We couldn't converse. We couldn't have a relationship with technology. What he saw was that graphical user interface, point and click. Drag the icon, and wow, when he saw that, he knew the world changed. And interestingly, I think if you remember some of the early Apple commercials, the people who could change the world, give us your crazies, and they showed Einstein and Maria Callas and Frank Lloyd Wright. That's where that idea was born. That's where the change the world came from. And actually John Scully, who's my mentor, told me the story because he heard it from Wozniak at dinner just a few months ago. So it's legit. But here's the point. Here's the takeaway. As important as that was, the graphical user interface, GUI, 50 years ago, and it's still the cornerstone of computing today, we're seeing a change. We're shifting from a graphical user interface to a cognitive user interface. It's no longer drag and click, it's think and do, with emphasis on the word think. Our ability to interact with computers are no longer transactional. That was the issue with Google, right? How much does a car weigh? I type it in and it gives me an answer, maybe. It gives me a link, maybe. Who the heck knows? But it was transactional. Now what we see is that is a cognitive, iterative, recursive dynamic where I have a dialogue. And interestingly, here's the thing. So this is new and this is modern and this is cool. No, it's old as dirt. It's the Socratic dialogue. It's Socrates and Plato speaking to and with their students. It's you and me in Pennsylvania sitting around a campfire talking about the good old days or what's coming in the future. And here's the interesting thing. It's rounds in a hospital. It's a pharmacist, it's a PharmD, it's a nurse, it's any type of clinician standing in the hallway talking about that patient they just saw, talking about a drug-drug interaction, talking about, well, maybe it's something whimsical, but it's that engaged dialogue that we are recreating in the context of technology and large language models. To put a period at the end of this, it's the cognitive age. It's now the age where thought is emerging as the dynamic element of how we think, how we live, and how we act.
So I think of the ability for our providers, our physicians, our pharmacists, our nurses, to tap into their existing knowledge, things that they've wrote, things that they've studied.
Yes.
Drop it into some kind of AI machine.
Sure.
And extend it, expand it, build care plans, build other information that they haven't thought about by sprinkling in pharmacogenomics or diet or supplements.
Completely. Or find out where to go to dinner, or find out where to go on vacation. I mean, we all have our own private corpus of information. Sometimes it's called a digital footprint, and that could be our emails over the past 10 years. Or it could be our clinical thinking, our papers that we've published, our white papers, our marketing strategies. It could be mandates or insights from a hospital, a retail pharmacy, or an institution. These things are compiled and consolidated, and then we can expand them. We can leverage them in the context of our needs and our desires. Look, a large language model is our best friend, or better than that, it's our favorite teacher. Everyone has had a favorite teacher. And, if you really think about it, maybe it's one. I mean, I have maybe one or two. I'm sure you have maybe one or two, but you didn't have 10. You didn't have 50, right? It was the teacher who got you. In other words, it was the teacher who was tuned to your brain's creative frequency, whether it was fast, slow, hot, cold, smart, funny, playful, academically rich, or maybe a little understated cognitively. It was that magical connection that tapped into your brain's creative frequency. And that's what we're seeing with a large language model. A large language model changes into something that I call an LLL. So we don't go from large language models into just innocuous beings. We become LLLs, or lifelong learners. And that, in the context of pharmacy, is essential. The data's coming at us too quickly. The guidelines are changing. The reimbursement is changing. My goodness, just in the Trump administration, we're looking at a variety of changes that impact health and funding and research. Yep. How can we understand that? We understand that in the context of an LLM, because we need to adapt. We need to understand how clinical medicine, how pharmacy is changing. And that lets us grow. And that's very, very important.
And it's good to preface that because you will help organizations, conferences that you're asked to speak at, organizations that look to you for research, to help them make the connections. Because I think the void right now, and I think the gap, some of these intelligent pharmacists that are doing amazing things, is knowing, how do we use it?
Yeah.
How do I use...
I think that there's a lot to unpack there. I think we should do an hour on that, on the utility of AI and large language models. A couple quick things. We have to understand it on a very fundamental perspective. In other words, the analogy that I use, which is really, really simple, is that Gutenberg unlocked words. He built a printing press. Now, that took 200 years to catch on. It was mediated in part by the Bible, but still people couldn't read. So what good is a book if you can't read? But in the final analysis, Gutenberg unlocked words. Then the internet came along, and what did it do? It unlocked facts. Principally, Google and search engines unlocked facts in a cold, sterile, transactional way. Well, here we are now, where AI and large language models is unlocking thought. From facts to thoughts. And that thought is not transactional. That thought is iterative. And it's that engagement that is profound. So that's where we are conceptually. We're in the cognitive age. But there's a practicality to that. And what we see in terms of the adoption of AI in clinical practice is that it's not one curve. We often look at, well, what's the adoption rate? 60, 20, 30%? No, that's not the way to look at it. We're actually seeing two curves. One curve is in the logistical capacity, scheduling, even something like drug-drug interactions, where there's a fairly mechanistic underpinning to seeking those things. That is expanding quickly. That's up in terms of enthusiasm about 68% from last year. But what we find is the other part is the cognitive side of AI adoption. And that's really tricky, Todd, because who's the smartest person in the room? That's an easy question, right? It's the doctor. And that's a very, very difficult functional and psychological construct to manage. Even if you're a pharmacist, there's a pecking order in medicine. Now there's a new boss in the room, and that boss is AI. AI is the smartest person in the room. In fact, there's a recent study just out of Google that looks at their new model, Gemini 2.5. They tested it against a PhD test. The name of the test is the GPQA, and it looks at, I'm looking down here, theoretical physics, molecular biology, organic chemistry. I mean, how many of us in this room really remember what a Diels-Alder reaction is? How many of us remember what sp3 hybridization is that allows tetrahedral bonding of carbon? That's at the heart of pharmacy and medicine.
True.
So what happened what happened here is that the model scored 84%.
Jeez.
PhDs who were allowed to use Google, in other words, who were allowed to use the internet, they scored 65%. So here's what's going on in the world, right? We are now at this precipice of having our AI assistants be smarter than we are. And what I find interesting is that's a psychological construct that many senior clinicians, chief of pharmacy, chief of medicine, have a hard time dealing with, because we all know medicine in many ways is ego-driven. So that's the step off the cliff now. God, I'm going to have that article out today where I break it down a little bit. But that's where we are. I think it's important to recognize that we're entering the cognitive age. And again, going back to the campfire and to Plato, let's go back to Eastern spirituality and talk about the Upanishads. The Upanishads are ancient writings that have an invocation in it. It says, as you think, so you act. As you act, so you become. And that's it. As we think, we now have thinking partners that make us lifelong learners, that make us actually smarter, and tune our brain in a unique way that let us think better. So that's the world before us. It's exciting.
It is exciting. I want the listeners to know John Nosta writes for Psychology Today quite often, as well as some other writings that are definitely out there. Last name Nosta, Nosta. Look him up on LinkedIn. If you're not connected, reach out to him. If you're a pharmacist, let him know that you heard him speak today on This Week in Pharmacy.
Absolutely.
Talk to you next time, John. Thanks for stopping by.
Always a pleasure, Tom.